Welcome back to the Housing Collective podcast. My name is Tom Neely, founder and director of Neimal Search, and today I'm joined by Jonathan Cowie, Chief Executive of Plymouth Community Homes. So Jonathan, thank you ever so much for joining us today. For the listeners, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself and your organisation?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I'm Jonathan Cowie, Chief Exec at Plymouth Community Homes. I've been posted about a year, and we're the second largest housing provider down in the southwest. We're about 70% of the social housing stock in the city of Plymouth, and we cover Devon and Cornwall. We have about the third lowest rents in the UK, which I think surprised a lot of people because of where we are in the southwest. But the city is also going through some massive growth, so it's recruiting or is looking for about 10,000 new employees in the city in about the next 10 years with some really big naval contracts. So it's quite an interesting dynamic in the down here at the moment.
Really interesting dynamic, without a shadow of doubt. And obviously you say there, Jonathan, you've been there for just over 12 months now. Talk to us a bit about your journey of becoming the Chief Executive of Plymouth Community Homes.
Yeah, so I've been in the sector about 14 years. So before that I was in the military and 20 years in the private sector. So for me, the service theme has been kind of all the way through from private sector kind of into housing and came in initially to Sovereign Network Group. I was bringing four kind of separate organisations together as one. I think for me, I came in through the service route, COO in the sector, ran an Almo in London for a while, and also Vivid as the COO down in the South Coast. So I think for me, there was a great opportunity to join Plymouth. It was looking for a chief exec with a service focus. I think it's a very community-focused organisation, and lucky enough to get the job. I have to say, absolutely love it down here.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. And I guess you mentioned there, you joined the sector 14 years ago from a really diverse background, which I want to touch on later on, from telecoms, utilities, obviously, as you say, military. So what attracted you to move into the sector 14 years ago?
So I think for me, it wasn't a sector originally, probably like a lot of us, that I thought I was going to move into. And so I was international telecoms, traveling around a lot. And I was approached by one of the headhunters, and that was around looking for someone with private sector experience that could come and help, in this case, Sovereign, to go through that transform journey to bring those organisations together. The attraction for me was twofold. One was it was the difference you can make. So that service ethos of doing the right thing, for me, was really strong. And I think that's something that's so powerful in our sector. A, the difference you can make every day, but B, that doing the right thing, which in the commercial world, you're about profit taking for the shareholder. Here, you see for every pound you put in, you see the difference you can make. And so for me, there was a real strong resonance from from an integrity and from a values perspective. The second thing, on a very personal level, my grandmother had been was suffering some domestic abuse, and it was social housing that saved her. And my mother grew up in social housing. And so from a personal perspective, I've seen the power and the impact of having safe, secure and affordable home when people truly need it. And so for me, if I can do something that allows us to do more of that, then great.
I think that's fantastic. And just talking about those prior experiences before housing, and also obviously you worked for Westminster as well. So how have those experiences from the military to telecoms shaped your approach to leadership when you've moved into the sector?
And that's interesting, is it are those things that have been important from the sector, or is it something that you've kind of learned and gone on, and I think we do in our sector as well? So for me, I think the really important things are about listening. So some of the best learnings I get are going out through my career, talking to our frontline teams, finding out what works, finding out what doesn't work, and it is about staying curious. So for me, irrespective of the sector, actually, I found that's been hugely important. And then actually coming into the organisation, talking to the frontline teams will tell you exactly what works and what doesn't. And it cuts through a lot of issues, perhaps with things as you get more senior in the organisation. You will be fed certain information or get certain lenses. And I think it's about how you keep it true and how you keep it real. So for me, I think that transcends any sector. I think the other thing is being clear what your role as leader is. And for me, it is about setting vision, it's about setting the clarity, but you're there as well as to serve to lead, you're leading to serve. And so I think it's making sure you stay humble, making sure you stay grounded, and continue to keep listening.
I think that's really interesting, Jonathan, because just one thing, I was actually listening to another podcast this week, and it was with the chief executive of three kind of Sports Direct and kind of big e-commerce business, as well as the kind of the high street stores. And one thing that he was saying was, I make sure that all of myself and the executive team do those kind of once a quarter, we are either in the factory, we're on the shop floor to really understand what is important to the kind of the frontline staff, because we can all do our presentations in the boardrooms, but actually if someone is saying, well, a spreadsheet from a delivery doesn't match up with what we're getting, they wouldn't know that if they weren't being spoken to on the front line. I think that's really important. Kind of chief exec, don't forget kind of the frontline staff see it on a daily basis. So as much kind of we have the big strategic agendas, if we aren't listening to our not only customers but colleagues, there can be a real disconnect.
I think that's right. I think the thing I'd word and probably should have mentioned, I think it's also about focus and clarity. So, though certainly from my private sector days, very clear focus. You knew what the top 3 priorities were. You knew what needed to hit in terms of financials. You knew what sort of KPIs said this you needed to hit in terms of delivery. And so I think one of the challenges we have in our sector is we have a lot of choice about what we do, where we put our resources. There's a lot of challenges in terms of balancing different things. And I think it can be really hard sometimes to be really clear and focused what the top priorities in the organization are, but how they're also disseminated and how do people connect to those. So for me, I think the other thing I'd say that I've learned through my career has been be really clear on that focus, be really clear what you're trying to get to and what the priorities are, and then make sure you execute well and keep that focus.
Exactly. And one thing that you also talk about, Jonathan, and one thing that you and I speak about regularly kind of offline is that ability to constantly learn and develop your own self. And one thing that you also are, along with being kind of a chief executive of Plymouth, which is a big old role in itself, you're also non-executive director of the Institute of Customer Service and Magna. So I guess I was keen to understand, how do you balance that with the day job, but also how do those varying experiences and perspectives inform your decision making as a chief executive?
Yeah, so the 2 NEDs roles that I do, I'm incredibly lucky to be doing them. I think one thing that's really important to me personally is staying inquisitive and that continuing learning. So how do we make sure we are keeping our skills alive? We're keeping open to new ideas. And so I think both of them, the Institute of Customer Service is great because I get to learn from some fantastic organisations. My fellow board members have been chief executive Sainsbury's, the chief executive First Direct. So hearing what those organisations are doing, how they're innovating, is fantastic. And I hope I can contribute back as well. And so within housing, within Magna, you learn, again, well, it's another housing provider, but they do some very different things. And so I think it's that stay curious, continue to learn from those. I think then coming back into the organisation, how do you bring those learnings or ideas back in? And so there's a couple, I think, recent conversation with Nationwide, the Building Society, and they were kind of segmenting, but really just a very simple model. I was just saying, what are the different groups of customers that have those different needs, whether it's a vulnerability or something else, and how do we just adapt our service proposition to support it? And so there's some of those are just about helping us to shape our thinking as we look at lots of segmentation models going on in the sector. I think fundamentally, do what you said you were going to go and do, and actually, what are those different groups that actually we might need to reflect how we deliver our service? And so I think it's just taking the best of some of the things I pick up and learn and bring them into the organisation, not necessarily to deliver, but to have a conversation. It's really important. We just throw around those ideas and just stay curious and keep looking up and looking out. So we don't just focus on here and now in our organisation.
Interesting, really interesting. That diverse viewpoint, like you say, from different sectors is so important. It's something that we've always got to do. Emma Palmer was on the podcast speaking exactly about that, just that constantly bringing in that diverse views. Because otherwise we're just going to constantly look insular, and nothing's going to change if we continue kind of looking at what we've always done. So, really interesting, Jonathan. And you've been with Plymouth now for 12 months. Talk to me about that kind of that first 12 months. How has it been, and some of probably the most significant achievements that you're really proud of over this last 12 months.
Wow, that's a question. So I'd say personally, absolutely loving it. Plymouth, I think Plymouth Community Homes as well as an organisation is superb. it's rooted in the community. So it's all about making the difference where people live. And as a city, it's about 250,000. So it's not the biggest of cities, but it's kind of very focused and quite landlocked with the ocean below it and then the walls above it. So it has a really interesting dynamic, but also with some really strong growth in the city. I think what I'm probably pleased of in the first year, I think it was around coming in and making sure probably three things. One is we're really clear and focused. What are our top 5 things that we want to focus on to really make sure we're prioritizing? There's some key things around the customer, but some other dynamics as well. I think the second was really around the curious kind of theme for me, and that is about really looking at how we use data and insight to make decisions. So the organisation is very good at delivering its frontline service. Our TSM scores are in 85% plus, but we're not really, don't have it in our lifeblood to truly understand why our residents contact us, why we spend the money that we do. And so it's being more curious, being more thoughtful, and understanding the insight. Why has our gas servicing gone up by 50% in the last 4 years since COVID? And really using data to help us make those decisions. So we're on a journey, but that would be second. I think third is from a stakeholder perspective, we're an anchor organisation in the city, and there's some amazing work that's going on with different partners. And I feel there's a huge opportunity for us to really integrate those. So we're doing a lot of work with just exploring those partnerships, exploring those key stakeholders. And as a result, we're doing some really different things. So we're now doing work on homeless. We're building some 4 and 5 beds to support some of those big families on homelessness. We're starting to do some work with young carers going out of the care system. We can get them into their home, their first secure home, and help them into employment. So for me, it's about looking at slightly differently, using some intelligence that's making a difference back in the communities we live, but we can use our resources in a slightly different way.
And just on that, Jonathan, you talk about data and insights. It's really interesting because we've just done a survey where we look forward in the next 12 months, the next kind of financial year. What is the biggest challenge or strategic priority for executive teams? And that is to get better with data and getting and also getting the organization to understand what is their data strategy and how you get under the skin of that data. So clearly, and I understand it's always an evolving model, but just talk to me about some of the challenges that you perhaps have had to overcome to implement more of a data look inside to the organization.
So I think there's 2 challenges actually. I think there's, if I look at not just as us, but as a sector, I think one is around using data and insight. I think the other actually is planning, which I'll come back to as a theme. But so to your question, I think data for me is at 2 levels. Firstly, do we understand how data is used across the organization? So there's the mechanics of how it's recorded. How do we get to that single version of the truth? I think secondly, then, in terms of using the data, I think you've got to start with the question, what problem are you trying to solve? So for me, and if you take the TSNs and the regulator, the consumer standards, of course, there's a big theme around, do you truly understand your stock? Do you truly understand your residents? And so if you take the theme of stock, do we really understand the patterns? Do we understand, so we're doing some work for our boilers to say, actually, we plan for them every 15 years, but they fail at 13. So let's get ahead of the game and replace them at year 12 and 13. So how are we using that insight on patterns of behaviour that we know going on, not as well as stock condition survey, to really drive and inform how we invest and how we deliver, to make it easier for our residents, but equally more cost effective for us because you're reducing your data there. I think from the residents, again, what problem are you trying to solve? What is it you want to truly know about your residents? And again, my interest is we've been putting in some just really clear service standards, so we're clear what we do and what we don't do. There are 12 core things we do. How do we journey map those? Why is it those residents contact us about those things? To me, true success here would be our residents don't need to contact us because we're proactively managing it, and 80% of our interactions are proactive, not reactive. The data and the insight can be used, and most of us have that in some shape or form. It's not you need a load of new stuff. It is just about the focus and the clarity about what questions you want to ask and what you want to solve. On the planning side, I'll move on to that, Tom, if I'll just to give a view. But I think one of the sector challenges, and this may be a little more elevated in Plymouth because of the growth here, but one I think is planning ahead around supply chain, and the second is planning ahead about our workforce. So with an aging workforce, and talk to a number of other HAs and with a very similar problem. So we're going to be competing for the same staff. actually, I think we'll need to quadruple, triple, or times five, I should say, our apprenticeship program to look ahead and knowing with the age profile of workforce we've got, we're going to have to plan and invest very differently, actually, in our workforce, both on apprenticeship level, but cross-skilling and upskill. And I think planning from a supply chain, taking all of the work we're doing on building safety, as well as the focus on 1.5 million new homes, and all the net C agenda and asset work we're doing, actually back to the supply chain, is it strong enough based on our 3 to 5 year plans to support that? So scaffolding and roofing are two massive shortages, I think, certainly in Plymouth, and I know kind of far broader than that. And so what are we doing to actually build a supply chain to support that? Because those are critical components for us to deliver.
I think that's so fascinating, and selfishly, Jonathan, I was scribbling so many different notes thinking about Nemo search as well about that data. I think it's a fascinating answer. Thank you for being so insightful on that part as well. There is, and I think it's fair to say across the sector, from a housing sector, I think there's so much more to be done in that regard.
Yeah,
as you say, sharing best practice, partnerships, as you said at the beginning, so important to get this. So and understanding what good looks like. So that's really interesting. And just in regards to the last 12 months, Jonathan, as well, you look at kind of looking back on that now, and you were a COO taking that step into the chief executive. What advice would you give to executives looking to take their step into a chief executive role?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a pressure you feel coming in where you're perhaps new to the role, and you want to get in, you want to prove yourself, and I think there's a danger for new chief executives coming in wanting to prove themselves very quickly. And so I think my advice would be go spend time, go interview the board, listen to the board members about what have they seen in the organisation, what's good, what's bad, what do they think are the priorities. The same with, of course, with colleagues. So as well as your senior leadership team, get out and do those soundings with the organisation. And thirdly, what do your stakeholders think of you? Who is critical to your success? And who are the top 3 to top 5 external stakeholders that are critical to you? And therefore, what are they saying about your organisation? And then for me, I think it's in month 1 to 3, it is then coming up with that forward plan, having that conversation with the board and your exec about those priorities, and then sort of going further out there. So I think it's the resistance to perhaps not go in and feel you've got to stamp your authority and get in there straight away. Take a bit of time just to really listen and learn.
Brilliant. And just on that, Jonathan, you moved. You also made the decision to relocate to Plymouth for this role. So talk to us about not only that experience, but also what advice would you give to other professionals in the sector that may be considering relocating for the right opportunity?
For me, what's been really personal is if I'm going to be involved back to the role of us as an organisation, I kind of want to be part of the community. So I think if you're thinking of locating and moving to that public, if it's moving across the country, can you see yourself living there? Is that where you want to build new friendship groups? Is that where you want to be part of that community and part of the decision making, perhaps in that area? I was lucky enough to already kind of know the area. In this part of Devon was an area we would have liked to have moved to at a point in the future. So it was an area we already knew a little bit about. And so we moved into temporary. I'm renting at the moment and just looking to buy somewhere now. So it gave us time to really just explore the area. But I have to say, I've fallen in love with the city of Plymouth, and I get to in this role, you get to play perhaps a more shaping role within the city itself as well. And I'm loving that. But I think spend a bit of time, make sure it's the right location for where you want to be, and how involved you want to get.
And probably a contentious question to ask back at you, Jonathan. I mean, do you think you could have done this without relocating?
Personally, no. No, I mean, there's an element you could say I could do it for 3 days a week, and I was living in Wiltshire before. But I think for me, if you're going to do it well, I think you have to be part of the community. I think in the nature of what we do as an organisation, Plymouth in particular, and our organisation is very community focused. And I think that was quite a strong theme through the recruitment process for the organisation, and it was important to the board. But I think that's in the nature of us being at the heart, being one of those anchor organisations, and the role we can play in the city. So I think, I've been at 2 events over the last 2 nights in the evening, which are all kind of related to what we do. I've got an event at the weekend, and so it's up to you clearly in as the chief exec. But I think that discretionary involvement in the community is also
great. And I guess as we look forward now, then, Jonathan, it is a challenging time in the sector, but it also creates some opportunities as well. But I guess when you look forward, both regionally, what do you see as some of the most pressing issues that need to be addressed to improve the state of the sector?
So, I'll and I think we touched on some of these, Tom. Rather than go perhaps down the the big stuff, which is government led, the fundings, all of those. I think NHF and channeling the work through those, I think is great. So I think they're doing a fantastic job to channel the economics and channel kind of the focus on things as a sector we need to be working with government on. For me, it is those two things actually. It's about our ability to control our own destiny, and for us to deliver what we need to do against our own balance sheets. I think it is the supply chain. I think it is making sure we are securing that supply chain to help us to deliver for the next 3, 5, 10 years. Actually, what are we doing with some of those smaller providers to help support them, to put some of that infrastructure into place? There are still a lot of failures of tier 2, tier 3 organizations in that supply chain. And so I think we've got a bigger role to play there. And secondly, I think it is about that workforce plan. We've just developed a 5-year workforce plan, which is looking at all the skills we need in the organization, both new skills that we need to deliver our strategy, but also those skills which are around perhaps an aging workforce, or where we can upskill and do some very different things by developing. I'm passionate about how do we harness the potential in the organization. We have a lot of silos we need to break down, and for me, a lot of leadership developments, which also takes us from managing to leading. But for me, I think it's about that wider workforce plan. I think for me, those are two things every housing associations are facing. But I think it's an area we need to do more.
You talk about the 5-year workforce plan. Also, last year you published a new 5-year corporate plan. So can you just elaborate on some of the key priorities outlined in that plan, and I guess how you intend to achieve them in the next 5 years?
Blimey, how can I do that in 30 seconds? So, so there I'll pick on 5 very quick. And so the top key things for me are, what are the top 5 we want to focus on? So customer, first of all, so absolutely how we listen, how we build that in decision making. Service standards, we're about clarity. Are we clear what we're there to do? Are we clear what we're not doing? And let's make it as frictionless as possible. So self-service, make it as easy as possible and more cost-effective as to do. Secondly, I think around our home, we've been on a journey to really accelerate just understanding our residents' homes, our stock assets. And that is, as well as the stock condition survey, it is about the intelligence of knowing where we need to invest. And also, one of the things I've taken from actually a good piece of work sort of a network group have done has been a really future look about the home standard. What does that look like? How are they investing both in their estates, their communities, and new build? And so we're developing a version of that for us, which is saying, what does we're going to spend tens of millions of pounds in the next, we're spending £1 billion in our region in the next 10 years. Are we clear where that investment is going and what good looks like? So let's develop that blueprint. Thirdly, for us, it's about our colleagues, and that is that workforce planning. It's that investment. It's everything from succession right through to upskilling and cross-skilling. And then from a planet's perspective, are we clear? What are we doing to make sure we are as green as we can be? And also within our estates, from biodiversity through to rolling out electric fleet for our trades teams. So I'll say those are our, and then finally growth. I should say, so we've set an ambition to grow our organisation by about 10% in terms of new homes over the next 5 years. Our board have just signed off that growth strategy, and we're increasing that. We've got quite low indebtedness, and so we can use our balance sheet perhaps in a more effective way. So we're delighted to be building more homes. And I think more importantly for us, we're only building social homes or a shared ownership. So we're not doing affordable.
And a couple of things that I just want to pick up around those priorities, John. I guess particularly given your background and your involvement in the Institute of Customer Service. Talk to me about your thoughts around the importance of customer engagement and how you plan to implement the know and listen to our customers priority outlined in your plan.
So I think three things that are really important for our residents are, are we focusing on the things that matter most to our residents? So how are we listening well enough? So we've set a new resident engagement strategy, and that is firstly, are we listening to what's important and what's priority? So, and some of that's not just in your surveys or in listening groups. It can be in the sentiment we hear from colleagues and how you turn that to life. So some sessions over the last couple of weeks, we've been hearing more noise from our residents about pests, and issues around that has started to increase in the last couple of months. So great, we can react to that, we can respond to it, and we can move more money over to that to resolve it. So that is about us being a responsive organisation and tackling things that matter most. I think the second, though, and certainly links into the consumer standards, it is how do we truly know that our residents are helping to shape the decisions of the organisation over things, again, that are really important. So the service standards I talked about, they were designed with our residents, and those are things we are saying what we do and what we don't do. Our performance against them will be published quarterly for residents and scrutinised by our resident groups. So those are things, again, affecting our residents day to day, through to how we've involved residents in all the procurement, from kitchens, bathrooms, through to other components that they have a say on. And I think for me, again, it's how we bring to life in the organisation. So anything we take to the board has to have a really clear understanding about how residents have been involved in either consultation, in understanding the decisions that we're asking the board to make. That's a journey, and it's still an ongoing thing, but that's about culturally in the organisation, making sure that, again, we're centred around having a customer understanding when we are making decisions. Well, that's not just give everything, but it's around a cultural change in how the organisation thinks about things.
Brilliant, really interesting. Thank you, Jonathan. And I guess on that, you also mentioned just on those priorities around development, which is great to see, and obviously the sign off of 10% through development and also acquisitions. But I guess across the sector, there is that naturally, because there is only one pot of money, there's that natural retreat from development to focusing on existing stock and bringing that up to standard, and rightly so. So I guess, can you share with us a bit more about that strategy of how you're going to achieve growth whilst also maintaining the quality for your existing residents?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really hard. I think right across, I think the biggest challenge for all boards and sort of exec teams in the housing sector is how am I balancing the spend around existing homes, the big focus clearly on further compliance, new regulation. Secondly, the impact of consumer regs in terms of how the consumer regs is expecting us to evolve how we deliver our service. And then thirdly, how do we increase supply and do our part in playing and tackling the housing crisis? So those three, I think, are always going to be really battling against each other to do so. I think for us, we've perhaps been a little bit more balanced on focusing on some of the asset and doing less new build. I think in the last 10 years, a lot of HAs have been, the regulators have been driving for, build as many homes as you can, use your balance sheet effectively to do so. And I think that's a bit of a rebalance in some cases for some HAs pulling back a little bit from development. And also the cost increase, of course, 20-30% higher costs in new build, as in certain assets chains as well. So our money isn't going as far as it was pre-COVID, and that's putting a big strain on as well. So for us, I think it's been clear, have we got the intelligence to know what our true asset spend is? So my comment on boilers, let's make sure we're prioritising things and using intelligence to make sure the plan is effective. Our new build programme, I mentioned earlier, our indebtedness is very low. And so we can we've upped our development programme by about a third. We could do more homes if we did more affordable. But again, from our perspective, our key ethos is we want our communities to be thriving and we want our homes to be truly affordable. Our rent arrears are 1.2% because we keep our rents low and we keep them at the social level. So, and then I think for the other bit I think touched on is, again, making sure we're building what is right for the community. And in different parts of the community, that might look quite different. I need more one beds in the centre of Plymouth as we develop in that space. We need some more family homes in different parts of the city. And so for me, it's getting that balance.
Yeah. And you talk about that. In fact, I guess final question, Jonathan, before we get on to those quick fire questions is you talk about balancing the agenda, the kind of, there are so many conflicting agendas, but there is also that comment by many a chief exec that it's a really tough role. it can also be considered as quite a lonely job because naturally you're not part of an executive team to a certain extent because you are the top of the tree. So talk to me about how you're balancing all of that, but also while staying present and also fundamentally enjoying the role.
Yeah, what a great question. So I think it's part of just having that broader network. So having other chief execs can go to my old boss at Vivid, Mark Perry. I use Mark as a bit of a sounding board to go and have a chat to, or just throw things around. So having that network of other chief execs, some of the WhatsApp groups are great. Just to perhaps kind of ask some of those questions where you kind of want to feel it's quite a safe space. I think secondly, I found it really useful talking to key stakeholders, certainly in my operating area, about the challenges they're facing. Dinner I had last night, two other chief execs in different sector, actually facing some very, very similar challenges. So that's a great source of just listening to what they're doing and how are they addressing some of those, and is that applicable to us? Um, and you know, the ICS and the magnets again, they're just good sources of being able to kind of do some sounding. So I guess triangulate. For me, what keeps me grounded is I will be out every week talking to someone in the office every day. I'll go and do a quick walk around, talk to colleagues at our head office. Getting out and about on the estates, I'll do a walk about every couple of weeks to go and walk around with the teams. For me, that keeps me grounded. Again, seeing things as we do, and the fantastic things we do as well. But for me, it's keep listening, stay curious, and then make sure you keep focused. I think on the comms side, we touched on, but I think it's really important. Again, you're able to listen, but play back some of those messages on a regular heartbeat basis with colleagues as well.
And Jonathan, from knowing you for many years now, I think it's also fair to say that you are thoroughly enjoying the role at Plymouth as well.
Absolutely. I get to live in a wonderful part of the world, a fantastic team, and one of the friendliest cities I have to say that I've ever worked in, and especially being international as well. And I get to live 15 minutes from Bigby Beach, so you can go out in the evening and go into bit canoeing and stuff. So it's a fantastic place. Anyone wants to come down to Plymouth, happy to take you out for lunch.
Given our conversation prior to recording about the Manchester drizzle this morning, it's certainly jealous of where home is right
Wonderful
now.
sunshine down here. It does rain, let me just say. It does rain a bit down in this part of Devon, but it's a great location, and very happy to give people a tour if they're interested in coming down.
I'll definitely take you up on that, Jonathan. And once again, thank you for joining us on this. Before I let you go, though, we do have some quick fire questions. So, what has been the most valuable leadership lesson that you've learned throughout your career?
Have a go. Have a go. Whether you fail or succeed, you will always regret not having a go in the first place. Well, Sergeant Christian, I learned that from very early on, and that's been true. Some stuff I've done, I kind of gone, yeah, maybe I wouldn't do that again. Others, absolutely delighted, but glad every single decision I made, I was glad I did.
Brilliant. And what advice would you give to an aspiring leader starting out on their journey in the housing sector?
Listen, stay curious, go out and do as many soundings and get lots of different opinions and views, then make a decision and then be bold and get on it and focus and drive. I think also don't be afraid of going to talk to more senior people who you may think don't have a connection with you, don't have anything that they think will be interested about you. Go ask them. Go ask them what it is that's priorities. Go ask them what it is that's important to them. And I think it's just having that bit of confidence. When I look back to, the 18-year-old version of me was actually, you never think you're going to be doing the things that you're doing. And that's just about having a bit of confidence and saying, do you know what, I'm going to go and ask some of these people.
Brilliant. And what do you think, or what do you believe to be the key leadership qualities required in today's rapidly changing world?
I think the first is humility. So stay true to yourself, stay humble. I think it's also around staying curious, be honest. I think stay and also be really focused and clear what you're trying to achieve, and make sure you're engaging, communicating about that and why.
Fantastic. And final question, Jonathan, one leadership book that you'd recommend to listeners?
Oh, do you know, I wouldn't actually, Tom. I'd probably answer that in two ways. I think the first is look at what I've really enjoyed is you look at the people you've worked with, you look at the leaders you work with, look at the colleagues you work with, and I think, what is the really good stuff about them? What's the stuff that you'd go, actually, that's not my style and I wouldn't do that. And so keep doing the stuff that you are really good at and find someone who is great at doing the stuff you're not. And I think for me, you'll pick the best bits of people you've worked with. And to me, that gives you the best learning, personally. I think in terms of where I would say I think it's really useful is, as well as sounding to others, where do you get sources of inspiration or information from that helps you just reflect and think? So I go to the McKinsey reviews, I get a daily update from McKinsey, I go to the House Business Reviews. So those are other ways that it challenges my thinking, as well as the conversations and interactions.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. And once again, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Housing Collective podcast, and thank you for joining us. And I hope to see you soon.
Great. Lovely. Thanks, Tom.